Really important we understand the difference between an expression and an equation. X squared plus 3x subtract 4 is an expression. There is no equal sign, so it's not an equation. And often we are asked to rewrite expressions in a different form. So when we're factorising, we take the quadratic expression and we put it equal to something in two brackets. That's what we were doing last lesson. If we have an equal sign, then the expression suddenly becomes an equation, and often we're asked to solve equations. You're trying to find the value of x that makes the equation true. And in order to solve quadratic equations, one method is factorising, and that's what we're going to be doing today. When two things multiply to give 0, it must mean that one of the two things is 0. And that's important when we're trying to solve this quadratic equation. Now we're going to solve it by factorising. And we may remember from the last lesson that to factorise this expression, we ask ourselves which two numbers multiply together to give negative 4, and when added together, give us positive 3. And the answer to that question is x plus 4 and x minus 1. Therefore, the quadratic expression is equivalent to the two brackets. Those two things are equal. So if the quadratic expression equals 0, it must mean that the two bracket form equals 0. Now, two things multiplied together are giving us 0, which must mean that either the first bracket, x plus 4, equals 0, or the second bracket, x subtract 1, equals 0. And this is going to give us two possible answers. In the first case, if x plus 4 equals 0, then x would have to be negative 4. In the second case, if x subtract 1 equals 0, then it must mean that x would have to equal 1. And we can check our two answers. If we take x equals negative 4 and put it into this expression, this quadratic expression, it should give us 0. And similarly, if we take x equals 1 and substitute it into our quadratic expression, it should give us 0. And if you do that check and you get 0, you know that your answers are correct. Here's a second example. Once again, we factorise, which means asking ourselves which two numbers multiply together to give positive 5, and when added together, give us positive 6. Now, there's only one answer to that question, and those are the answers plus 5 and plus 1. Therefore, if the quadratic equals 0, then the two brackets multiplied together must equal 0. Two things multiplied together equaling 0 must mean one of them is 0. Now, no, I'm not saying that x must be 0. I'm saying one of the brackets must equal 0. That means either x plus 5 equals 0 or x plus 1 equals 0. If x plus 5 equals 0, x would have to be negative 5. And if x plus 1 equals 0, x would have to be negative 1. And once again, we can check our answers by substituting negative 5 into the quadratic expression, and it should give us 0. And then taking negative 1, substitute it into the quadratic expression, and it should give you 0. And if it does, you know both of your answers are correct. Example 3, we wish to factorise which two numbers multiply together give negative 12, and when added together give negative 4. If they're multiplied to give negative 12, it must mean one of the numbers is positive and one of the numbers is negative. And in fact, our answers are x subtract 6 and x plus 2. As before, we put the two bracket form equal to 0, and it must mean either the first bracket equals 0 or the second bracket equals 0. If it's the first case, where x subtract 6 equals 0, then x must equal 6. If it's x plus 2 equals 0, it must mean x would have to be negative 2. And remember, do the check at the end, put your two values into the expression, and if it gives you 0, you know your answers are correct. So to summarize the steps, step 1 is to factorize the quadratic expression, and step 2 is to put each bracket equal to 0. If x subtract 3 equals 0, x would have to be 3. If x subtract 2 equals 0, x would have to be 2. And you can check by putting both values into the expression, and it should give you 0.